Dirty Politics, Hard Times, a trilogy of Chartism, narrated by the author, Malc Cowle. Book 1, The Manchester Chartist, Chapter 1. Sons of poverty assemble, rouse them from their silken slumbers, trouble them amidst their pride, swell your ranks, augment your numbers, spread your charter far and wide. Truth is with us, God himself is on our side. Pigs bollocks, God's on nobody's side, he's dead if e'er he existed. You're a cynical old bastard, Tom, that's the Chartist him, show respect. Tom Oldham turned his tired watery grey eyes onto his young companion, his lungs full of cotton dust, his hands cut and nailed, his fingers twisted and deformed, his face a mass of lines and wrinkles. He already looked an old man at the age of 31. Don't thee be getting involved with them radicals, young Ackroyd. They'll regret it if thou dost. Something's got to be done. We can't keep living from hand to mouth like this, now knowing from one day to next if we have a job to go to, and every time we get a new one it's low paid. Thee shall count thy blessings. Thy missus is in work, ain't she? Aye, Bess is, and she's suffering as a result. Nobody should be working 12-hour shifts in mill. Young Daniel's suffering as well. It's me should be labouring. Bess should be at home with lad, suckling her breast. Tom knocked his drink back. Trouble with thee, Daniel, is they don't know when thou art lucky. There's plenty of men claiming for lack of work, and they hasna got women folk to bring money in. Aye, you're right, and that's why we need to get up off his knees and fight for charter. Nay, lad, I had similar ideas when my feyther took me up to Peter's Fields back in 1819. Fat lot of good that done us. I ended up covered in my feyther's blood and gore, with a wedded mother to look after. He stood up, resting one hand on his drinking companion's shoulder. Thou art a good lad, Daniel, but think of thy son. Keep out of it. That's my advice, and I hope they take it. Tom donned his battered old hat, raked it at a jaunty angle, and walked out of the pothouse. The lad remained silent, trying to understand his mentor's feelings. Old Tom would have been about 12 when he'd accompanied his father to St. Peter's Fields, just 19 years before. Although he'd never met him, he knew Tom's father was a weaver, as was Tom. Daniel had only been 1 year old the year of the Peterloo massacre, but few Manchester folk were unaware of the horrific events that fateful day. It remained part of the town's folklore. 60,000 people had assembled on St. Peter's Fields to listen to Henry Hunt, Richard Carlile, Samuel Bamford and others argue the case for parliamentary reform. Most of the people were angry. Many were handloom weavers thrown out of work by mechanisation and the rapid growth of the factory system. Manchester's population was expanding fast and unemployment rife. Working people reduced to living in overcrowded hovels, amongst filth and squalor. Despite the widespread misery and resentment, the intention was to hold a peaceful demonstration. Over a third of those present were women, the majority dressed in white. Deliberately so, for white was the symbol of peace. Many had children with them. Nonetheless, not for the first time, the establishment panicked. The government feared an insurrection, the French Revolution still fresh in their minds. They persuaded magistrates to mobilise the Salford and Manchester Yeoman Cavalry and 400 special constables. A Royal Horse Artillery unit with 2 6-pounder guns and 400 men of the Cheshire Yeomanry reinforced them. As Henry Hunt took the platform, the magistrates sent in the constables to arrest him for sedition, garbling out the Riot Act. The crowd moved in to protect their speakers. A bloody massacre resulted. The cavalry rode into the crowd, slashing out with their sabres indiscriminately. 19 people lost their lives that day. Over 500 suffered serious injuries. Now, in September 1838, Tom's unhappiness with his intentions to attend the meeting on Kersal Moor provided food for thought. To witness your own father cut down and cleaved almost in two before your very eyes must have been horrific for the 12-year-old. No doubt the horror was just as vivid now in Tom's mind as it was back then. At the same time, Daniel remained convinced of the need for serious action. He'd managed to obtain just 3 days' work in the past fortnight, and knew he was a damn sight luckier than many of his compatriots. The Manchester Guardian had reported the week before that no less than 50,000 workers in Salford, Manchester, and the surrounding textile towns were either out of work or on short-time hours. The Corn Laws implemented by Lord Liverpool's government in 1815 to keep the price of wheat high in the face of cheap imports had forced the price of bread and flour to the point where people couldn't afford a loaf. Richard Cobden had formed the Anti-Corn Law League based in Manchester earlier that year to seek repeal and fight for free trade. Brought up in poverty, despite the best efforts of his own father and mother, both of whom had died from typhus before they were 40, Daniel had determined his own son, young Daniel, just a year old, should have a better future. He finished his glass of small beer and set off for a home in nearby Ancoats, intent on informing Bess of his plans for the morning. Bess Ackroyd finished sweeping the bare floor of the downstairs room, closed the door, and placed the broom against the wall. The room was chilly with damp. She crossed the flags to tend the fire, adding a couple of pieces of coal to the rapidly dying embers. Her husband would be home soon. She'd need to get the kettle boiled. Satisfied with her labours, she went over to the old wicker basket that served as young Daniel's cradle, and lifted him gently into her arms. He awoke and looked up at his mother's face, his large dark brown eyes gazing intently into hers, as if to discern her innermost thoughts. She smiled at him as she undid her blouse and latched him onto a swollen nipple. "Sort thee fill out, Daniel, afore your feyther's home wanting his tea." She cupped the back of her baby's head gently with the palm of her hand. Bess would be 19 in November, a handsome, well-built country lass, with hair almost as black as the contents of her coal bucket. Her eyes, an exact match of a child's deep dark brown, contrasted sharply with her sallow complexion, the hallmark of a mill worker employed for long hours, without seeing natural daylight. She was tired, although it was a Sunday, the one day of the week when she was free from the burden of wage slavery. She spent the last 4 hours with her friends finishing off a job they'd been working on for months. She wondered what Daniel would say when she took him to see it. She cast her eyes around the room which, along with the cramped bedroom upstairs, comprised their home. When they'd first moved in the place just 18 months before, the floor had been bare earth. Over time, one slab here and one slab there, Daniel had paved it with gritstone flags. Where he'd obtained them from she'd never asked. She didn't need to. Daniel was a proud, practical man, a skilled carpenter by trade, and above all, honest. Sparsely furnished, the room contained 2 wooden chairs Daniel had received from an employer unable to pay him cash, or so the time miscreant had said, and a sturdy dealed kitchen table made by himself. These occupied the space under the window, looking out on the tiny yard with the privy Daniel had constructed, a luxury not many working folk enjoyed. Against the wall to the left-hand side of the door resided an old wooden, iron-bound chest, left in a local pawnshop by some long-forgotten sailor. In this they kept their clothes and a few prized possessions. When they had company it served as a double seat. Next to it stood the wicker basket, in which they placed their soiled clothes ready for washing. On the right-hand side of the fireplace, against the one wall free from damp and mildew, stood Daniel's pride and joy, a solid oak bookcase he'd manufactured the previous winter to house his small collection of books and pamphlets. Daniel's father had insisted the lad should be able to read and write. Although Bess had never met him, she knew some of Jeremiah's sayings off by heart, one of them being, "Learning's far better than silver or gold." Bess shook her head at the thought. She knew what her late father-in-law meant, and didn't disagree with him about education, being an avid reader herself. Nonetheless, a bit of spare brass, let alone silver or gold, wouldn't go amiss now and again. The only other furniture was a small deal dresser, which housed their bits of china and cutlery, pots and pans, flanking the other side of the fireplace. "Still," she mused, "we're better off than most." The sound of the door opening interrupted her thoughts. A smile lit up her face as her husband stood before her. "Sit this helm down, Daniel. Soon as young un's had his fill, I'll mash your tea. Don't a rush, lass. I'll put kettle on. He walked over to her, looked down at his son for a brief moment, and kissed the end of her up-tilted nose affectionately, as he invariably did when they met after parting for any length of time. She watched him as he bent down and picked up the fire-iron to swing the cast-iron pot-holder out over the grate. He retrieved the old iron kettle and placed it in position over the burning coals. 5'6" tall, he was slim and wiry, typical of his class, Manchester born and bred, and never overfed. In her eyes, the most handsome and considerate man in the world. She wouldn't swap him for all the tea in China. He took his place in the seat opposite her. "They look tired, Daniel. I were just about to say same about you, Bess. I've had a good productive day, I can't complain." "Productive? How do they mean?" "I'll show thee later," she said, a twinkle in her eye. "Thou art invited to a celebration. We're to be at Mary Upton's be 6 sharp." "A celebration? What's Mary got to celebrate?" "They'll just have to wait and see, Daniel Ackroyd. What was it thy old man told thee? Patience is a virtue." "My old man used to say many things, including the meek shall inherit the earth, but he were wrong," Daniel replied, pulling her face. "The meek get trampled on by rich and powerful, and that's the truth of it." "What's got into thee, Daniel? You sound angry." "Nay, lass, I'm not angry. Not any more. I'm determined. Time for anger's past. I'm bent on action." She gazed at him, wondering what ideas occupied his head. "I'm joining t'others. I'm marching on the moor in morning, and there's nowt you can say to stop me." Her eyes narrowed and a frown creased her brow. "And what makes thee think I'd object?" "Well, they just thought, did they? Well, I'll tell you this, lad. If they weren't planning a joint rest, I'd have left thee looking after Babby." She grinned as she stood up and walked across the room to place young Daniel back in his basket. "Mary Upton's looking after all young uns. Every one of us working in mills marching to Kersal Moor tomorrow." She fastened her blouse and walked back to her husband, cupping his cheeks in her hands. "Give us a proper kiss on the lips, Daniel, unless they don't want to demonstrate for charter with me. We've declared holiday, and tied our Heathrow, we might as well keep Mildo's lot for all money he's going to make out of our labour tomorrow. They'll be welcome to join us. They can link the arm when they aren't carrying the banner." The dimples formed under his cheeks as he brought his lips to hers. They kissed, and he turned in his seat, put his arms around her hips, and gently swung her around until she sat on his knee. "I don't deserve you, lass. You're a girt shaft of sunlight in an o'ercast gloomy world, and that's simple truth of it. Come here, thee great lummock. Thou art ray of sunshine that brightens me days, if e'er there was one," she said affectionately. "So, what do you reckon's our work, Daniel?" The carpenter stood with young Daniel clasped to his chest, gazing at the grey-blue silk banner hung on the barn wall, its message distinctive in red, gold and white letters. "It's wonderful. A work of art, if ever I sees one, Mary. How many hours' labour went into it?" The midwife shook her head. "We ne'er counted, lad. There were 20 women worked on it. We made time when we could. Your Bess were one of the leaders. You should be proud of her. She's a right greyly lass and kept all our spirits up." "It must have cost a fair bit." "It did, lad, but we were lucky. The union provided money for sewing thread and needles and such, and we had an unexpected benefactor." "A benefactor?" "Aye, our Heatherow's daughter, Irene Rose." Mary shook her head, a twinkle in her eyes. "Seems she's a friend of Bess's and a secret supporter at cause. She provided silk for banner. It's worth a fortune." Daniel nodded. "Aye, Miss Rose is a kind-hearted lass." He laughed, a thought crossing his mind. "I bet her feyther won't be well pleased if he finds out." A voice interrupted. "A pity there's got my message wrong." "What do you mean by that, Jasper Clayton?" "As far as I know, first demand at Charters for universal male suffrage." The slogans on the banner proclaimed Labour, the father of all wealth, nature, its mother, universal suffrage, annual parliaments, Peterloo, not forgotten, not forgiven, Gibraltar Mill cotton operatives, united for the Charter, peaceful if possible, forceful if not. "It's a shame we didn't have your help, experience and advice when we were making it, Jasper," Mary said, a wry smile on her face. "But there's plenty of thread and materials left on yon table if you want to put it right. You're welcome to use 'em." "Nae need to take off and be offended, Mary Upton. I'm only pointing out campaigns for male suffrage." "They are wrong there, Jasper," Bess Ackroyd intervened, a touch of sharpness in her voice. "Yon banners work at Gibraltar Mill operatives, as it plainly states, and most of us are women, in case you hadn't noticed. Them are our demands, and we've chosen with great care, each and every one. We're after right to vote as well, and they might as well be knowing it sooner than later. They can spread it around rest of men folk whilst thou art at it." "You tell him, Bess." Daniel laughed and turned to Jasper. "I think you'd best make your own banner if you're not prepared to support the women." "I'll tell thee what, Jasper. If you're not happy marching behind the banner, I can do with a little help tomorrow," Mary intervened. "I needs to entertain over 40 little uns. You're a kindly man and a natural clown, and we could make a costume out of scraps we have left o'er. How about it? You'll look right gradely in blue and gold silk with a red hat and belt.